Right, so on the back of that, other news at the Sabo, President Cyril Ramaphosa is expected to receive the Lady R independent panel report today. The retired judge, Phineas Mojapela, led the panel, which was tasked with investigating allegations that South Africa sent weapons to Russia, which had invaded Ukraine in February last year. While President Ramaphosa gave the inquiry into the Lady R ship 6 weeks to conclude its investigation, the presidential spokesperson, Vincent Magwenya, says that the panel is ready to hand over its confidential report to the president. So on that note, it's bringing Hennie van Vuuren. He's the director of Open Secrets. Hennie, good afternoon. Thank you for your time with us here on the SABC.
Afternoon, Liesl.
So in lieu of what has transpired since the allegations leading up to the handing over this report, would you like to comment on the approach in which this matter has been dealt with? Any concerns as we start off this conversation?
Yeah, Liesl, thanks very much. I mean, I think from our perspective at Open Secrets, we've been concerned and watched this very carefully, along with others in civil society from the get-go, because we see this as an issue which the public has a direct interest in. The allegations made by the US Ambassador Ruben Brigetti not only led to an international crisis, but it had the potential of imperiling a significant trade agreement that South Africa has with the United States and hurting South African jobs. And it certainly meant that the rand nosedived, and it harmed the economy, and it harmed the well-being of working class people in this country. And so the argument has been that if we are going to get closer to the truth, it can't be a process that only involves the intelligence operatives and others from the United States, and a closed process involving members of the judiciary in South Africa and the South African presidency. It needs to be an open process. And instead, our concern has been that President Ramaphosa, instead of having an open commission, he appointed an inquiry. He's involved a senior, well-respected judge in Judge Phineas Mojapela in this matter. I think our concern has been in our writings to the presidency. The president's senior legal advisors have notified us as Open Secrets that they do not intend to make the findings of this report public that this inquiry has undertaken. And that, I think, is worrying, because the South African people have every right to know exactly what transpired in Simonstown. Were weapons uploaded or not? Was the American ambassador telling the truth or spreading falsehoods for that matter? And certainly, did our government know what was happening in a very important strategic public facility, which is the Simonstown Naval Base in December of 2022? The reports certainly show a contradiction in opinions between that of the Minister of Defense and the President on the one hand in South Africa, and the US ambassador and no doubt the US intelligence services on the other.
All right, Hennie, thank you for that, because we obviously saw that Vincent announced that the president will decide which parts of the report to make public. And you raised some of the questions that had come to the fore, including whether the US ambassador was speaking the truth, which people were aware of the cargo ship's arrival, what contents were offloaded or loaded, and the departure and destination of the cargo. There were also claims, which perhaps added fuel to the fire, about where the vessel should have docked, given that it was a commercial vessel. Instead, it didn't dock at Table Bay. Do you think that also has any bearing on the discussion we're having at this point?
Yeah, I think absolutely, Liesl. I think that there are certain red flags here. The docking of a vessel, and certainly a vessel that was sanctioned by others by the American government and others in South Africa at a military base. I mean, it is kind of extraordinary that if they were offloading goods, why they could not have done that in a normal port. Let's not forget, South Africa exports weapons every year around the world. Those weapons are loaded onto vessels at commercial ports, right, where fruit and vegetables are loaded onto container ships, and shoes and clothing are loaded off. So there's no reason why they could not have used the commercial port, any one of those in South Africa. There's a definite question as to why the South African government allowed this. And I think we have every reason to be asking the questions, was anything loaded onto that vessel? We are told by the South African government that weapons certainly, or there was munitions, technical equipment that was loaded off, that was part of a long-term contractual agreement between South Africa and Russia. But, curiously, we're told that this was an order that that was placed before COVID and was now inexplicably delayed for 3 years. Well, if that was the case, at the very least, I think the South African government would have every reason to come clean and say, we will let you know exactly which vehicles entered and exited the port on that evening. Here are the photos, here are all of the details. We will definitely make all of that information available. I think the concern is that the very likelihood that parts of this report are going to be made secret, I think tends to help the public see the opportunity for some kind of a conspiracy or cover-up. And that's certainly not what we want. And I think arguably that's certainly not what Judge Mojapela would want, because I think that potentially that if the judiciary is involved in closed processes at the behest of the presidency, it does make the public question as well the integrity of the judiciary in some of these processes. I think it's important, the very first recommendation that Judge Mojapela should be making to the president when he hands over that report today is these are my findings and that of my committee, but we are suggesting to you that you need to make all of this information public within the next 2-3 weeks, precisely because it is in the interests of the South African people.
Well, Hennie, we're obviously going to get reactions, perhaps as news about that report comes to light. So we'll monitor developments on that front. I think just very quickly, as in the interest of time to wrap up, South Africa's had to navigate its relationship with the US. But we're also seeing a shifting geopolitical landscape and really what these allegations have done. I wonder if you could just, if you'd like to weigh in on the implications thereof, perhaps also what this means for South Africa going forward. We're also looking at some of the BRICS summit that's happening. We in the middle of the Ukraine-Russia war that's also influencing dynamics. What has this done to what's unfolding on that front?
Well, Liesl, I think certainly the way in which this matter was handled at the onset did us no favors as a country, because, if we are going to be making the argument that we are a neutral country in this effectively colonial war that's been engineered by Russia against Ukraine, then I think it would be important for us to come clean immediately and say there were no weapons uploaded, or if there were weapons, this was our decision and this was the basis to do so. So I think that we have been walking an understandable tightrope as any country would when two major powers are at loggerheads. And as you say, there are geopolitical movements around the world. Our involvement of BRICS, of course, is part of that kind of complexity. I don't think that we should be no-toeing to the Americans necessarily in doing everything that they request of us. But if we are to be an honest broker, and if we are to say as a country that we place human rights at the forefront of our foreign policy as a country, then I think that honesty, openness, transparency, which our constitution demands, should be at the forefront of the minds of our politicians. Certainly when President Ramaphosa announced a peace mission, a so-called peace mission led by him and a group of African leaders a few months ago, and that happened immediately in the wake that this scandal broke in a major way in May of this year, I think it serves to undermine not only the integrity of our foreign policy, but puts into question whether we are telling the truth in all of those processes. And I don't think that that's very helpful, not only to the country's image, but to the integrity of our foreign policy. And I think that should really be, again, something that should be occupying the minds of our politicians, and we should certainly be putting pressure on them to make sure that while they may want to ensure that we act as an independent country that is able to look after our interests and the interests of African countries first, we need that to have process to play itself out in the public. It cannot be left to powerful individuals, powerful politicians and their interests to guide that process. It needs to be a public process that we can all participate in. Well,
we're obviously going to get reactions and perhaps weigh in on the recommendations unfolding as that report is handed over. Hennie, thank you for your time with us on the SABC. Hennie van Vuuren, Director of Open Secrets, weighing in really as the Lady R confidentiality report is set to be handed over to President Cyril Ramaphosa, led by an independent panel.